Are you a single woman who loves Jesus and desires to remain centered in your faith and values while you wait for the husband that God has chosen for you? Perhaps you're single and growing weary in the wait, or in an unequally yoked marriage and contending for the salvation of your spouse and are in need of a spiritual SOS. Our guest, Shayla Ortiz, is joining us virtually from Atlanta today with firsthand experiences, lessons, and stories in hand. Shayla is a wife, mother of three, and passionate encourager in the Christian singles community. For nearly a decade, she has counseled hundreds of young women, helping them find their way into a committed relationship with Jesus Christ. Her ministry, My Single Purpose, formerly known as Spiritually Single, reaches and inspires thousands of singles around the world. She is also the author of Praying Through Singleness, a guided prayer journal for young women, which offers a unique perspective and guides them through the challenges of singleness today. We also had the honor of writing an endorsement for this book right here, which I love the cover, and we will be talking about as well. It's butterflies in a car. And Shayla's prayer is that every single woman will find encouragement and perspective in her pursuit of God while she awaits her future spouse. So join us on our Heart to Heart as we talk about all things Jesus, life, and love with Shayla Ortiz.
Savior, you're all I, Savior, you're all I, you are all I need, you are all I need. Savior, you're all I, Savior, you're all I, you are all I need, you are all I need.
Hello, our beautiful friends. We welcome you to the Elena and Natalia show. We're your twin hosts. I'm Natalia Moranyan. Hello, and I'm Elena Moranyan. Today, we are welcoming our dear friend from Atlanta, Georgia, virtually, if I may say. Her name is Shayla Ortiz. She is a passionate encourager in the Christian singles community. For almost a decade, she has counseled hundreds of young women, helping them find their way into a committed relationship with Christ. Her ministry, My Single Purpose, reaches and inspires thousands of singles around the world, and she has also written a book called Praying Through Singleness, a guided prayer journal for young women, which we also had the honor of writing a little endorsement for. But we are finally so grateful to welcome Shayla Ortiz. Hi, friend. Hi.
Hello. I'm so honored to be on your show today.
Oh, well, honor is all ours. I know we tried to do an interview, I think it was a couple of years prior.
A couple of years ago.
But for such a time as this, I feel like the Lord has ordained for such a time as this right now. And even we were encountering some audio issues in the beginning, but you know what? Not today, Satan. This interview is happening, and your message and encouragement and hope for singles is going to go out.
I know that even though there was a little technical interference beforehand, that deaf ears will be unblocked spiritually so that the message can be heard to all singles, women and men alike, unequally yoked marriages, which I know you have a lot to touch on as well, and just whatever is on your heart to share. But before we get started on those details, we'd love to just know a little bit about you, maybe a fun fact about your family, just for our viewers to get to know the lovely person that you are.
Oh, thank you very much. I have three teenagers, and actually,
you look like a teenager, if we may say.
Oh, thank you so much. It's the glow of Jesus. But yes, I have a 21-year-old, an 18-year-old, and a 15-year-old. So they keep me busy. But yes, a fun tidbit about me is that my calling is for the youth and the young adult. And so whenever I'm around young people, I feel in my element. My husband is like, why do you always gravitate towards the young? And I'm like, it must be my calling, because I just feel so comfortable with them. And so I think that's a little fun tidbit.
It even says in the word, unless you want to become like a child, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. So there it is, our childlike faith ignited.
Yes.
If you could use three adjectives to describe yourself, or three words, whatever they may be, what would you use? It's a little icebreaker.
Passionate, loving, and joyful.
I love that. Passionate, loving, and joyful. Our previous interview that we just recorded today with our father, the topic was all about joy and how important it is as Christians to have the joy of the Lord. And truly, having a joyful heart is like medicine, and the joy of the Lord is our strength. I love that.
Amen.
I can see the joy of Jesus over you.
And we would even love to talk about single and them having joy even through singleness, that as we were discussing in other interviews, singleness is not a sickness, it's just a season for some, or you might be single for a reason. But before we touch on the subject of singleness, you also have a lot of, not that you're single, you're happily married, you have experience with being unequally yoked, and a very unique experience on that, thus which birthed your spiritually single Facebook fan page, and just grew insurmountably and had a lot of fruit, and does currently with My Single Purpose. But just tell us about the beginnings of a little bit about your testimony of being unequally yoked with your husband and how that developed into the Spiritually Single Facebook page.
Yes, I grew up in a Christian home. My dad is actually a pastor. And so I was a preacher's kid. And I was Christian all my life, but I wasn't living for Christ. And so when my dating years began, I was completely not aligned with God. I was doing my own will. I looked the part, but I wasn't actually legit. And so when I met my husband, I was so disconnected with God that I really missed all the red flags. Um, don't get me wrong, he's a wonderful man and I love him truly. We've been married for 21 years. But at the time, he professed to be a Christian. But since I was so out of tune with the Lord, I couldn't hear the shepherd's voice. And so I made the decision to say yes when he asked me for marriage. Once we got married, he told me, you know what, I don't want to go to church anymore. I don't believe exactly what you believe. And so I really felt duped. I felt fooled. And thus my spiritually single journey began. Um, I he you know I always say that if I would have been connected and aligned to the Lord, I would have been able to sense. I would have been able to sense and not be deceived. But when you're not aligned with the Lord, you can't hear him. And so I did my will, not that of the Lord. But the Lord is so graceful that
Amen.
my impulsive decision, he wove into his plans. And that I can attest to, being 21 years married. It's by the grace of God. And, I'm so thankful to him. But yes, when I, as the years progressed in 2011, I remember uh, telling the Lord, I was like, okay, Lord, I want to serve you. I want to serve you, but I was in a position where I didn't have, I wasn't financially stable to where I could start a full blown ministry. I didn't know what to do. I felt lost, but I knew that in my heart, I wanted to serve the Lord, because after I got married, I realized, and I started having children, I realized that I needed to get closer to my father so that I could teach my children. And so a desire was birthed in me, a passion for the Lord was born inside of me. And I started just pursuing him full force. And so my husband was caught aback because he was like, this is not the girl that I met. But so in 2011, I prayed to the Lord, and I was like, I'm ready to serve you. I don't want to sit on the sidelines anymore. I'm ready to honor you with my life and help others. And while I was praying, I sensed him say, do a Facebook page. And I was like, oh my goodness, and a blog as well. And I was like, but I am not techie at all. I have no idea how to do this. But I trusted him, and he opened a path. And I remember that I did my blog and my Facebook page December 2011. And at first, the page was called Spiritually Single, and it was dedicated to the unequally yoked. And so I started encouraging the unequally yoked, but then somebody shared my my posts on their page, and this person had a really big platform, and overnight thousands of singles came
Wow.
rushing into my page. I'm talking about 100,000 of them.
Wow.
And when that started happening, I was like, okay, Lord, I need to shift gears here because I'm talking to a different audience.
Right.
And that's when the Lord placed it in my heart to start ministering to singles. And
What
it
a
took off from
story.
them.
That is fabulous. It's like an only God story where even he used your act of obedience to be able to minister. And truly, I feel it's so strong that obedience is the key to fruit and to blessings. And it was
Yes.
your act of sacrifice and even your total dependence and reliance on the Lord that led to more open doors from spiritually single to my single purpose. But talking about being unequally yoked, what exactly does unequally yoked mean to those who don't understand the concept or the term or think perhaps it's outdated? What does it look like for equally yoked partnerships?
Well, being unequally yoked, you know, the Bible says, do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. And what that means is people always automatically believe that that's for marriage only. But
Right.
you know, it's really meant for any type of relationship, of course, marriage, but it also could be in dating, it could be in the business world, it could be
Right.
with friendships. And so that kind of covers a lot. But unequally yoked is used a lot in, you know, the marriage community with
It
couples
is.
that one is a believer and the other one is not a believer, and you're married. So when I teach about unequally yoked, when you yoke two animals together, it's, you know, it's like a wooden, like a bracket that joins
Right.
two animals together so they can plow together and move in one direction together. But when you're unequally yoked, you're in that bracket together, you're hooked together,
Wow.
but one is going in one direction and another's going into another
I
direction.
love that
So
analogy. I love it.
you end up going in circles instead of going into the same direction. Actually, you don't move at all because you're going into two different directions. And so I believe that um, unequally yoked can also mean, because I get this a lot from people that are dating, and they're like, well, I understand not being unequally yoked in marriage, but how does that translate to dating? And I was like, well, the same applies. You could be a believer with an unbeliever, or you could both be believers and just not have the same goals, not have the same passion, um, view the word differently. You view your spiritual life differently. You view intimacy with the Lord different. So as you could see, it covers a lot of areas that people just tend to concentrate on marriage, but it's very important to be able to define it and make sure that you don't fall into it.
Yes, that's an important distinction you made because most people think of unequally yoked as simply a non-believer with a
Right.
believer, but you also mentioned that you can also be unequally yoked with a believer, maybe in terms of the passion or the way they
Yes.
view things. So how did your passion reignite? You mentioned that when you started having children that you had a desire within you to want to teach them the word of God. So how
Yes.
did your passion for the Lord and to teach your children in the ways of God reignite your spouse's passion for the Lord?
Well, it took years. It took years, but I truly believe that people don't want to just be preached at, they want to see a life that follows what you preach. And so when that passion was ignited in me, I had to take a different approach with my husband because he met me a certain way, and now I was completely morphed into something different. And so we had
Interesting.
to learn each other again. We had to kind of rediscover each other again,
Right.
because I was a completely different woman. When I was single, I was broken, I was lost. And now he was with a woman that was complete, that was healed, that
Wow.
was full. And so I didn't need him to complete me anymore. I was complete. I just needed him to be my spouse. And so, yeah. Yeah, it
Wow.
took many years, but it taught me that my number one ministry is at home, and that my testimony, I couldn't just talk about it. I had to walk the walk, you know? I had to really be an example at home.
Love is truly healing, and it sets people free. It revitalizes and changes marriages. I'm not married yet, but I surely know that sacrificial love and contending and interceding and praying for your spouse will surely reap fruit and benefits and a bountiful harvest. And how did you
Absolutely.
praying and interceding and contending over your husband lead him into a faithful relationship with the Lord and transform your marriage?
And I also feel it's so encouraging to women who may be
Currently.
in unequally yoked relationships, who maybe got married when they were both unbelievers, but then one or
Yes.
the other
Which
became a
happened to
believer.
you.
It says in the word that by their testimony,
Yes.
by the believer's faith, by the believer's passion, that's to stay in the marriage, because that will encourage the unbelieving spouse to build up their faith. So
Yes.
even the Bible encourages that. And your life
Yes.
is a living testament that even though it may have taken years for your husband's
They were not
passion
in
to
vain.
reignite for the Lord, all those prayers that you prayed, all the tears that you sowed were developing a beautiful harvest.
Absolutely. I wasn't perfect to start off. The Lord has been teaching me and guiding me on how to be a good spouse, the spouse that my husband needs me to be. When I speak to the unequally yoked community, one of the first things that I make sure that the ladies know is that you can't change your spouse. And that was a hard lesson that I had to learn, because at first, when I became a believer, I wanted my husband to be just as fervent as I was. I wanted him to grow as fast as I was growing. I wanted him to understand my new language, but he didn't speak my language. And so you have to be very compassionate and graceful with your spouse, because we're all in a journey, but our journey is different. They One thing that the Lord taught me is, Shayla, your husband is not going to grow at your pace. He's going to grow at my pace, because he is not your project. He is my masterpiece. And when the Lord
I love
spoke
that.
to me that way, I understood that just like the Lord was patient on me and waiting on me to grow and actually want to be with him and actually learn, I have to show that same grace to my husband, because it's free will. The Lord doesn't
Yes.
force anybody. And so, as humans, who are we to force anybody else to believe in our timing or in what we believe? It has to be done by the Lord Jesus
Absolutely.
Christ. I remember for a while, we went to marriage counseling because I thought that our problem was emotional and psychological. But we would go to a counselor, and if I didn't see growth in him, then I would switch the counselor. I would go to another one, and like that, we went to 5 different counselors
Wow.
until the Lord said to me, Shayla, the change you're seeking in him is only going to be through me. Now, I'm not saying
Wow.
counseling is not a good thing,
Yes.
but when it's a spiritual change you're seeking, it doesn't matter how much counseling you go to. Only the Lord Jesus Christ can make that change possible. And so that's when I decided, okay, I'm just going to have to pray. And I became a prayer warrior for him, and I stood in the gap for him, even when it didn't feel right, even when it didn't feel good, even when I disliked them, because you can marry somebody and be in love with them, but you might not like them
Not like them.
some days. And so
I can
I
imagine.
just had to I just had to be steadfast. So I
So
just
you had
kept
to be
praying for him.
steadfast.
And
Amen.
Yes,
stand in the
yes.
gap. How important is that? absolutely remind me of that movie War Room.
Yes, yes.
She comes to mind, and so powerful. And we need more women of God as yourself who are standing in gap for their husbands, for their men of God who are planted in their lives and interceding on their behalf. Speak on the importance of prayer and not using prayer as a last resort, but as a first response, a lifeline to heal up, bind up marriages, and to bring about healing and freedom and joy ultimately while standing in the gap
Because of prayer.
because of prayer.
One of the things that a lot of the women that have written me and that I've counseled for many years, none of them like to hear that the answer is prayer. Many people think that praying is you're not actively doing something. They think it's passive. They think that it's not going to work fast enough. But prayer is the key. And I did see
Amen.
a big difference in a lot of the girls that I would counsel. Most of the girls that I've counseled have been single, and they come back telling me, Miss Shayla, you were right. Prayer has changed. But the thing is that it's not just about changing them, it's about changing you.
Right.
And in my life, as I prayed for my husband, I realized that he wasn't changing, but the Lord was changing me. And I remember one day I was praying to the Lord and I was like, Lord, I need you to do this in him. I need you to change this about him. When all of a sudden I heard the Lord say, it's you I want to change. And
Wow.
when that change occurs, then I'll change
Yeah.
him. And so I became a firm believer in prayer because I see prayer like a crank. And when you're praying, that crank, it's moving forward. When you stop praying, you know, it stops the forward movement of, because prayers have it's a spiritual power. It's a force that
Yes.
we can't see, but it's working. And then when you stop moving the crank forward, sometimes it goes backwards. And so you gotta keep that forward motion going. And so consistent prayer is what I tell the young ladies. It's not just about a small prayer. It's about praying every day consistently.
I love that.
Consistent and persistent prayer.
Yeah.
We need to keep at it, even if we
Yes.
don't feel like it, even if we don't want to
Yes.
do it. Sometimes I even say, even if it feels like a duty, it will supernaturally turn into a delight, because we know that we literally cannot breathe or take our next steps or get our blueprints for the day if we do not pray. So prayer is like breath to a believer.
And when you have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, prayer isn't simply talking to God, it's talking with God. It's desiring Him. It's just simply sharing what's on your heart, like you're talking with a friend. Of course, having that reverence and that honor for the God of all the universe, but to also have that comfort that you're not just talking to yourself or to the wall. Your prayers will be answered. And sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes the answer is no. And sometimes the answer is wait or not yet. And waiting is the hardest thing sometimes. And how
very
can
weighty.
Yes, the weight
Of the weight.
I feel has been feeling very weighty lately. I feel for many singles, many have been contending for years for their promises, for their kingdom spouses, and have just been feeling that burden of the weight and feeling like, have I been forgotten? Has God forgotten me? Why is no one seeing me? So what encouragement can you give to those people who have been waiting for their promises that haven't yet come to pass?
Yes. One of the things that I've heard is, I actually had somebody tell me, how can you give advice when you're married? How can you give advice because you don't understand what the weight is like? You have no idea what we're going through. And that is true. But I think that
But you were once single too, so you have some perspective.
But what I do tell them is that my perspective is unique, because since I didn't wait on God, I had to have many years of consequences for the decision that I made. And so I'm giving them advice out of the perspective of, look what happened to me. You don't want to make the mistake I made. And so I think it's pretty powerful perspective, because I come from a place of, I've lived it. I'm not just telling you
Yes.
what might happen if you don't follow God's will, or if you don't wait for His will. I've lived it, and so I'm a cautionary tale of to encourage you to wait on the Lord. And so
Yes.
what I would tell singles right now is just to, and I know that it's easier said than done, but again, going back to prayer, when you pray, the Lord gives you peace. There's an inner peace that comes with
Amen.
consistent prayer and an intimate relationship with the Lord. The peace that comes, it's a peace that you can't even explain, but also it gives you peace with your timeline. You're not so focused on it hasn't happened yet. You're just focused on Him. Another thing is that, like I said, prayer changes you. And there's so many things that as singles, they're so focused, and this I'm speaking out of experience from my ministry, and so many that
Right.
I've spoken to, so focused in finding the one that they forget to prepare to be the one. And so they're praying for a godly spouse, but are they worthy of a godly spouse? All the things that they've placed on their list that they want on another person, do they are they also have they fulfilled what they want in somebody else? If they want a godly person that prays and is passionate about the Lord and serves, well, are you doing those things? So I think it's important to take a step back and say, okay, Lord, I'm going to wait, but I want to prepare myself. I want to prepare myself, and I want to get right with you, because there's so many things that are hidden from us. And we think, okay, I'm ready for marriage. I have a relationship with the Lord. I'm a good Christian, but there are so many things that are hidden that only come to
Yeah.
light with an intimate relationship with the Lord. And those things are so important to address before marriage, because the last thing you want is to enter marriage with unresolved spiritual things that need to be dealt with before marriage.
I love that, to speak on the unresolved, issues that need to be worked on before marriage, so that doesn't become an issue in the marriage.
And to focus on, instead of finding the right one, to
being
being
the
the right one.
Yes. And there's so many things that you need to deal with before marriage, because if you don't, when you get marriage, it's not a fix it all. It actually amplifies the problems. And when I say to singles, pray, I mean seek deliverance from generational curses. Seek deliverance
good.
from
Yeah.
soul ties. Seek deliverance from witchcraft or curses spoken over you. Because when these
Wow.
things are broken, then you're free and clear to
Wow.
put yourself with someone else and not bring that baggage into the relationship. Because it was my experience that I had to deal with soul ties in my marriage, and that is the worst thing ever, because it's something that hinders you from growing in your relationship. And so that's very important. When I talk to singles about getting prepared, they're like, but what does that mean? I'm like, spiritually
Right.
preparing yourself means dealing with the tough and difficult things that don't feel good. It's the things that are hindering your growth and that are going to hinder you from being the spouse that your spouse needs
Exactly.
spiritually.
Jesus, you're all I